Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. Welcome to another edition of How to Do Life. I think I'm looking forward to this more than any other because I've thought so much about the art of communication. I'm going to start in an odd way. I'm going to admit to saying I don't achieve the level of communication that I'd really like, which is what I call being transformative. Being able to be so compelling to someone emotionally and intellectually that they actually make a change, that they're transformed. I think I know, it sounds really conceited, but a hell of a lot about the various things one must do to be a great communicator. And I think part of where I fail, but hopefully you'll be somewhat more successful, is that I don't remain aware enough. I get lost in the passion of it, of a conversation, and I don't remain vigilant enough to these very important things that I'm going to share with you that are at the essence of effective communication. I also like to think this is about as high a level of communication skills as a person has the intellectual capability to keep in mind as you're conversing. So think of this as an advanced course. And again, you could end up deciding this is garbage and just press delete. But I like to think this is going to be a very advanced course in communication, and it's long. I don't know how long I'm going to keep doing this. This could be 40 minutes, maybe shorter. And again, part of my belief is that concision is important. I'll be as concise as I can, but I don't want to be any more concise than I want to make sure it's long enough that it really does meet what I'm suggesting, which is that it's going to be quite a comprehensive advanced course, that this half hour or whatever that you spend on this, if you take notes and you really try to incorporate some of these ideas, maybe take notes, keep them in front of you, make them top of mind so that you really do these things on a regular basis, will be invaluable to you. Okay. Now the first, and again, I think maybe the most important thing, although it's so obvious, is we all think we listen well, but we don't. Really listen means paying attention to what's said, not said, body language, crossed arms, especially a change of body language. Because if they start out open and then they suddenly get like this, or they slow down, or their voice raises, that tells you a lot. But of course their words are very important as well. Being aware of that, really listening, and then asking a good follow-up question, or make a comment, ideally one that builds on what the person says. I used to be very, very argumentative by nature, a New York Jew, typical. But I've learned that ends up being a barrier to effective communication. So listen your butt off, and then when the person finishes, err toward the side of amplification, and if you're going to make a counterpoint, do it tactfully if possible. And it requires patience, which is not one of my virtues. But let's say you strongly disagree with someone. The impulsive way is usually wrong to disagree. Say, oh, no, that's stupid, or that's wrong, or no, what about this? Even what about this is a little milder, it's still no good. Not optimal. What's optimal is something like, and of course it's going to vary with the situation, but it would be something like, I can understand why you would think that way. In fact, I used to think that way myself, but I'm wondering if it might be a good idea to X, or I'm wondering whether a better approach is X, or wondering whether there's a good argument that can be made for X, and then end with the four most powerful words, maybe in the English language, at least according to J.W. Marriott, the founder of the Marriott Hotels, which is, what do you think? Okay, next. Of course, this is a lecture, so it violates the following rule I'm going to tell you, but very important is something called the traffic light rule. I made it up, but it's gotten more play from other people than most things, so I wanted to mention it up front. The traffic light rule is this. During the first 30 seconds of an utterance, your light is green. People are listening. They don't think you're a blowhard. They're not dying to get something in. They're not afraid they're going to forget. So 30 seconds, your light's green. Next 30 seconds, your light's yellow. There's an increasing possibility that the person is going to be wishing you would just shut up already. either because they have something that they want to say, or because it's just too much to take in, or it just feels rude that it's, a conversation is an exchange of voices. It's not a series of lecturettes. So your light is yellow in the second 30 seconds, and at the 60-second mark, your light turns red. Yes, if you're telling a truly interesting story, you see the person's engaged, everything is fine, you can go on a little longer. But generally, you want to stop at the 1 minute mark and or ask a question. Next, in a conversation, and again, all rules of thumb are just rules of thumb, they're not always, but in general, you want to aim to be talking a little less than half the time, 30 to 50%. That ensures that the person feels valued, heard, and you're more likely to learn something. You know much of what you're going to say. You've played these old tapes a million times. So it's a nice rule of thumb, the 30-50 rule, talk 30 to 50% of the time, of course in a two-person conversation. If it's a four-person conversation, a little less than your share would be 25%, so talk roughly 20 to 25%. Very important, and it's something that I'm working on it to this day. Rarely interrupt. Yes, there's a time to interrupt. If you're in this fast-paced conversation where everybody loves talking over each other, and there's no loss, fine. But that's very rare. Also, you want to interrupt, yes, if the person is really long-winded and on a long rant and you feel you don't want to subject yourself to that, of course. But generally, it is really wise to really rarely to interrupt. It's rude. People, that it implies that you think your pearls of wisdom are better than than letting them finish and say what they're going to say. They may indeed have more they want to say, that it takes some time to get it out, to formulate the idea in their head. And so what they say in the first 20 or 30 seconds may not be the most valuable thing they have to say. It may comes later. What else is there? If you let them finish, you're going to be more relaxed. Instead of feeling you got to be right there ready to jump in, you're able to relax. And also, if you follow the rule of waiting 1 Mississippi, 1 second after they finish, you've given yourself 1 second to think about what you might say. And you may say something that's better, smarter, wiser, kinder, whatever, with that 1 second, because your brain neurons fire thousands of times in just that 1 second. Next, and this is quite hard, but I'm saying this is kind of an advanced course in communication. Individualize. Ideally, if you know you're going to be talking to somebody, something important, ask yourself, how complex should I be in my description of things? How brief should I be? How intense as opposed to relaxed I should be? Not always, but you normally want to mirror that person, but not at the expense of what's important to you, right? You also want to adapt your length of utterances. For some people, I think of professor types, going on at greater length is more in their style and more what they'd appreciate. But most people like that, what I was saying, that traffic light rule, keeping your utterances between 5 and 40 seconds generally. Another kind of individualization is great, is understanding what the person's hot buttons are. You may know that in advance, or it may be important for you in your early questioning to understand, are their hot buttons their career, their looks, their health, their family, fun, money, status, pop culture. Everybody has 1 or 2 or 3 major hot button issues. And good listening to them and asking them questions about, tell me what you're thinking about these days. What are you looking forward to? Those kind of questions can really unearth a person's hot buttons. And then if you know those, you can focus on that, and that's going to make your conversations much more effective and get the person to like you more. Another form of individualization is whether a person is more fact-centered or feeling-centered. People vary a lot. Sometimes I'm, with a certain kind of person, I'm going to be citing statistics and facts and logical reasoning. With others, I'm going to talk about how it makes you feel, how it makes me feel, how it makes others feel. You have to vary that if you're, to avoid being just wrapped up in your own world and therefore being a much less effective communicator. You've got to focus on people's individual differences. And again, that's one example of how feeling-centered or fact-centered. Another example is how transactional versus process-oriented. Some people just like to get down to the facts, not a lot of small talk. Let's figure out what we can do. And it can be very ethical, but it's all about getting something agreed to, done, moving forward. For other people, life is in the process. Conversations are in the process. It's slowing down. It's talking about just human things, taking time for laughs, little side discussions that sound interesting. Ask yourself how transactional or process oriented the person is. Another of those may seem less important, but cursing. How much do you curse, if at all? Actually, my clients, I don't know if they're telling me the truth or not, but they tell me that that I curse with some frequency because it makes me seem more like a regular guy. But for some people, like if you're talking to a very conservative religious person, cursing may be seen as really insulting. So you really have to make an individual decision. Now I want to talk about about words that make you seem smart and then by extension actually make you smarter. I'm not asking you to remember all these, but I'm going to give you about 40 words, but I do think that they're really valuable in terms of making you appear smart and be smart. First is risk-reward. I'm going to use COVID examples for these first some of them because it's so we can all relate to. Let's say you have limited indoor exposure to people outside your household, so you know you're at lower risk. So might the risk-reward ratio be better for you for the next month or two if you just took the behavioral precautions and didn't take the vaccine right away? A month or two from now, the intermediate term side effect profile of these vaccines will be clearer. The kinks in getting access to the vaccine without a long wait should have been resolved. So by assessing the risk-reward, but on the other hand, you may be more likely to be exposed. So by using the word and thinking about the concept of risk-reward, you seem more intelligent and you are more intelligent. The next one I want to share is the word preponderance. It's a fancy word that means a majority in the strength or number. So a typical usage of it might be the preponderance of the evidence suggests that immunity to COVID from exposure is only temporary. Right? Preponderance. It's not all the evidence, but it's most of the evidence. The next word is a very simple word, but it makes you seem intelligent, which is the word why. Often, an intelligent response to somebody's assertion is why. For example, I'm curious why you believe that people are more likely to establish and maintain immunity if they're interacting with other people rather than completely staying at home. Why? Next word, it's actually a little phrase that I think is a good sign of intelligence, is unintended consequences. In deciding whether to pursue a policy, intelligent people carefully consider the possibility of unintended consequences. For example, an unintended consequence of being urged to stay home may be an increase in intimate partner violence. Another example, ameliorate, and its antonym, exacerbate. Those words, ameliorate and exacerbate, are alternatives to black and white terms like cure and kill. So, for example, ventilators may exacerbate COVID's patients' pulmonary problems because ventilators can overinflate the lungs. Or you could say that certain protocols in hospitals are known to ameliorate the recovery rate. The next word is insufficient. Nuanced policymaking is difficult because of insufficient data. Not that there's no data, it's like insufficient data on what dose of exposure leads to what extent of disease, disaggregated, that's another nice word, by race, gender, and underlying conditions. I think you can understand what the word disaggregated means by the context there. Race, gender, and underlying conditions, meaning instead of the overall data, breaking it out by race, gender, sexual orientation, and disaggregated, nice word too. Antithetical, that means hurtful to. So example, nationwide restrictions are antithetical to the more granular decision-making, that's the more micro, atomic decision-making, that's required in weighing the medical versus the economic curve's impacts. Next word is evoke. That's a politically correct synonym for the term trigger, evoke. Yelling someone who's not wearing a mask risks evoking a verbal or even a physical tirade and hardening the person's position. Evoke, good word. Ostensibly, that means it would seem to. I'll give an example. Ostensibly, people won't contract COVID if following the recommended guidelines, but A disconcerting number of COVID patients claim that they couldn't have been exposed to so-called cases of unknown origin or silent transmission. Ostensibly, it means it would seem, ostensibly people wouldn't contract COVID if following guidelines. Okay. Next one is full dimensioned. That means comprehensive. I'll give you an example. Effectively changing recalcitrant, that means stubborn, social distancers' behavior may require a more full dimensioned analysis. What are the personal beliefs and social forces that need to be addressed, and how? Traditional public service announcements, messages from celebrities, from community leaders, social media, signage on billboards and at high foot traffic locations, community meetings, and perhaps other approaches that might be unearthed by interviewing non-compliant people. Full dimension. That was an example of quite a full dimension analysis of non-compliance with social distancing. The next term that is a sign of intelligence is lemming. A lemming is an animal that, according to myth, will foolishly follow other lemmings off the cliff. In common parlance, however, a lemming refers to someone who mindlessly follows other people. So, for example, some people seeing their friends not social distancing are like lemmings following suit. It's usually, as you can see, used in a same way, following suit in something bad, not just following suit in something that's reasonable. Edifying. Edifying means educating in an important way. For example, I find it edifying to compare the New York Times and Wall Street Journal's perspectives on how the U.S. is handling the pandemic. Next word, time effective. That's an approach to a task that yields the most benefit per minute. A time-effective approach to developing a vaccine might be automated assaying of messenger RNA. The next word that makes you seem smart is metric. It means a factor that is selected for measurement. I'll give you an example. Hospitalizations would seem a more useful metric than is cases, that is people who test positive. Metric. Factor selected for measurement. Next is the term reframe. Reframe means to look at an issue from a different perspective. If we reframe mask wearing as a sign of coolness rather than an overreaction, we might improve the compliance rate. The next word is inordinate. It means unnecessarily large. The broad lockdown seems to place inordinate weight on the infection rate and too little on the other offshoots, or sequelae, the fancy word, the human costs and the economic costs. A word I use all the time now to replace mankind, it's a politically correct alternative to mankind, is humankind. The user of humankind, just apart from the gender thing, it indicates you having a broad perspective. So, for example, in determining who should get a vaccine first, it's wise to consider the net effects on humankind. This is a term I like too. Zeitgeist, it's a German term, but it's used in English now. It means the spirit of an era. Users of the term zeitgeist recognize that recently developed orthodoxy needs stand the test of some time before earning status as truth. The current zeitgeist distrusts both politicians and the media, which militates against the public's wise decision-making regarding COVID as well as on other issues. Another example of zeitgeist, the current zeitgeist values redistribution toward a society in which everyone is treated more equally. Next term I really like, I use it all the time, is wisdom. That refers to knowledge at a higher plane. I'll give you an example. One of society's challenges is how to infuse wisdom into people's behavior regarding COVID as well as more broadly. I also like the version of wisdom called, wise. The words clever or smart only go so far. A wise decision considers not only what's right for now, but what's right in the long run, and not just for you and me, but for your sphere of influence, even for the planet. An even loftier version of wise is something called cosmic justice. What's the right decision not just for humankind, but in terms of universal goods and evils? For example, say a psychotherapist or a doctor or whatever in a small town might be clever in planting a false rumor about his or her only competitor. A smart clinician might write an article for a local publication that highlights his or her best attribute compared with the competitor without mentioning the competitor. But a wise clinician might realize that the greater good might be served at least if the two of them agreed to market jointly, highlighting the sorts of clients that each is most effective with. This is one of my very favorite words, merit. Merit is a messy word. It's so hard to ascertain. Merit goes beyond what can be quantified. It's the overall benefit versus liabilities of an idea, a product, a service, or a person. And that often requires subjective qualitative analysis as opposed to quantitative analysis. Too often people avoid that messiness by relying too much on the quantitative or the black and white. For example, Pat graduated from Harvard and Lee only graduated from no-name state and Alex didn't go to college at all, so I'm just going to interview Pat. That can result in suboptimal decisions. Next, and I love all these terms to be really honest, low-risk action. And these are all terms that I use all the time, and I think they benefit my writing and my speaking and my thinking. Low-risk action. Some of my clients ruminate too long. They'd be wiser to take a low-risk action. For example, a client has, and this is a real client, has for 2 years now ruminated on whether to apply to a clinical psychology graduate school, feeling he has to solidify his core beliefs and career goals before deciding whether to apply. It's probably wiser to apply, and upon entering, use his existing beliefs and potential career goals as a starting place, while remaining open to changing based on the experiences and people he meets. So, taking a low-risk action. One more example. It's a bit like the sailor who wants to go from LA to Hawaii. He or she's going to end up in Hawaii sooner if that person, if he or she stops the land-based planning at the point of diminishing returns, sets sail, and then adapts the course, the position of the sails, the speed, depending on the weather encountered. It's a low-risk action to start setting sail. Shoestring competitor. It's another example of a term I love. It helps your thinking, helps the effectiveness of your doing. A shoestring competitor is an example of a low-risk action. Often enacting the full-blown version of ideas is expensive and time-consuming. It's often wise to at least consider a shoestring competitor. For example, regarding whether to get a PhD, it's time-consuming and expensive. Shoestring competitors could include as little as job shadowing, or on-the-job training, or a certificate or master's program or an independent study. If those prove to be a cost-effective way to achieve an adequate version of the goal, great. If not, the PhD program isn't going away. I should let you know, you're listening to How to Do Life with Marty Nemko. I'm talking about my goal. I'm not sure I can ever achieve this, but my goal is always, I'm aspiring to making this the very best possible mini course on communication. It'll be roughly a half hour long. Okay, back to these terms that make you seem intelligent and by using them actually make you more intelligent. The term redistribution. Policymakers and the media don't like to use that unvarnished term. But every time we raise taxes to pay for programs for the poor, every time we make a service available to everyone without regard to whether they pay, like Medicare for all, it's redistributing from society's haves to society's have-nots, independent of merit. In developing your own policy beliefs and voting decisions, it's wise to view such issues not sugar-coated but unvarnished. Redistribution is the unvarnished term. So that word redistribution, important term. Next, these are not intelligent, but they show that you're aware. I just had to throw this in because it's important. Intelligent people are secure enough to frequently, when deserved, say, good point, nice job. There's a tendency to withhold praise. After all, it can appear judgmental. If you praise something, you might criticize something next. So you're not the accepting person that many people crave. Or you fear that issuing praise is going to encourage entitlement. Oh, good, now you praise me. I can get away with something or ask you to do something for me. Or you might withhold praise because it implies you feel inferior and you prefer to keep your insecurity private. But intelligent people push past that and when deserved say, good point, nice job, and so on. The next term is responsibility. Rather than the pursuit of happiness, consider making responsibility primary. Responsibility to yourself, your family, your employer, society. And a related term, the more complex term that seems quite intelligent, but I love it, is contributory. It's worth thinking about whether you're sufficiently contributory. Alas, thinking about it is far from achieving it. That requires another word that's worthy of wider use, even though since the letter rip 60s, it's become out of fashion, and that word is discipline. The next word that makes you seem intelligent that I want to share with you is fair-minded. That term encourages statesman-like rather than ideologue thinking. It also adds gravitas to your position. For example, a fair-minded analysis would raise these issues. The next term I like is externalities. Most problems have multiple causes. For example, a person may be poor not just because of any intrinsic weaknesses, but because of externalities, a problematic family, neighborhood, culture, limited access to capital, and so on. Another term I love is under-discussed, or another version of it is under the radar. For example, a perspective that's under-discussed but worthy of consideration is, and then you mention it. I love the term thought experiment. In trying out an idea, create a thought experiment. Here's an example. Imagine there were two identical Earths, and in one, all hiring was done purely on the candidate's merits. On the other Earth, efforts were made to compensate for certain groups' past and current injustices and inequalities. On which Earth do you think greater good would ultimately accrue? That's a thought experiment. Another term I like is ad hominem. It's a Latin term, but it's used in English, and it refers to disagreement by calling somebody a name rather than by a reasoned argument. For example, I'm dispirited by the amount of ad hominem disagreement on cable news shows, social media, comments on internet articles, and even YouTube music videos. Next term, again, I love all of them, but this is one I use all the time. The word is probabilistic. Key to critical thinking is to be able to make probabilistic assessments of alternatives. For example, the realistic best case scenario is X, and for these reasons, I assess the probability of it occurring at 30%. The realistic middle outcome is Y. For these reasons, I assess its probability of occurring to be 60%. And the realistic worst case outcome is Z, and for these reasons, I assess the probability of it occurring at 10%. That's probabilistic thinking. Opportunity cost. I love it. Along with probabilistic thinking, considering the opportunity cost of a choice that you're going to make may be critical thinking's most important component. For example, before our nonprofit invests in a new building, we should consider the opportunity cost. We could just spend a bit to fix the old building and use the rest of the money to hire tutors and other staff that would serve our clients. Got another 6 or so here. Cherry pick. It's a word I like too. Cherry picking is using an unrepresentative example to make a point. For example, a client said, he was late to work and he didn't get in trouble, yet when I almost got written up. Cherry picking militates against solid decision making, so I tend to often call it out as cherry picked examples. Iterate. Great word. Most excellent things didn't start excellent. They underwent iterations, revision after revision. So for example, you might say, hey, let's come up with a quick and dirty first draft plan and then we can iterate it. Next term I like is pervasive. That refers to a widespread but not universal belief. For example, the pervasive view is that cognitive behavioral therapy in general has better efficacy than do other treatment modalities. Pervasive. Mitigate. Too few interventions cure or solve a problem. Mitigate is usually a more accurate descriptor. For example, in many cases, SSRIs mitigate depression lows. The lows of depression. Mitigate, make better, ameliorate, mitigate. Next term is 3 different terms that are pretty synonymous, and I love them. Meta-analysis, meta-evaluation, and review of the literature. So many studies are flawed because of an inadvertent error, investigator bias, or the infeasibility of rigorous research. Meta-analysis, meta-evaluation, literature reviews, they analyze multiple studies and so produce more valid findings. So, where possible, especially in social science research, which may be especially prone to flawed findings, try to find those aggregational studies, again, using the term and actually looking for meta-analyses, meta-evaluations, reviews of the literature. And finally, I love this term, cosmic justice. That may be the highest goal, period. As often as possible, think of an action's implications, not just on all stakeholders, but on how it comports with universal justice, with a cosmos, that if there were a God, would make God nod. Cosmic justice. So that's a 28-minute, 29-minute course, advance the courses I can give that's nonetheless practical on the art of communication. Even if you don't use any of the terms, do remember that the key to effective communication is to stay aware, to really listen, to adapt your approach to people based on who they are, and with that, I will simply say there's another episode of How to Do Life. I do thank you for watching. I plan to have more new episodes coming soon. Anyway, if you're watching this on YouTube, as always, I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always love your comments, look forward to them, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.